65 adult men lived packed together on a wooden warship barely wider than a modern living room. They slept on rowing benches, shared soaked wool clothing, breathed cold salt air day and night, and crossed some of the most hostile seas on Earth. There were no toilets, no pipes, no waste containers, no medical officers. By everything we know about disease at sea, this should have been a perfect breeding ground for sickness. History tells us that ships far more advanced than Viking longships lost entire crews to dysentery, cholera and typhoid. And yet Viking crews didn't collapse. They didn't rot from within. They stayed operational long enough to raid, trade, explore and return home. That contradiction is not mythology. It's engineering, discipline and survival logic at its most brutal and efficient. If you're here for real survival history, not legends or Hollywood nonsense, make sure you like this video, share it with someone who values real-world historical intelligence, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to WARFRONT Survival. This channel exists to preserve the lessons that kept people alive when failure meant death. Now let's get into the system that allowed Vikings to survive weeks at sea without sanitation. The longship was designed to prevent decay, not comfort. The Viking longship was not built to be clean in the modern sense. It was built to prevent stagnation. There were no enclosed decks, no sealed compartments, and no dark lower holds filled with human bodies. Everything happened in the open. Wind, salt spray, rain and sunlight moved freely across the ship at all times. This mattered because most deadly maritime diseases thrive in still air and enclosed wooden spaces. The Viking solution was exposure. Fresh air constantly displaced contaminated air. Moisture never stayed trapped long enough for bacteria to bloom. The harsh environment itself acted as a natural disinfectant. The hull design really reinforced this philosophy. Viking ships used what's called clinker construction, with overlapping planks that were riveted together. This clever approach allowed the hull to flex with the waves, but, well, it also meant that seawater would leak in pretty much all the time. Now, to modern builders, that might sound like a complete failure, but to Vikings, it was actually a feature. The leaking hull, you see, functioned as a sort of flushing system. Water was constantly entering the bilge, and throughout the day the crew would bail it out. This created what you might call a perpetual rinse cycle. Food scraps, spilled broth, dirt, sweat, and any accidental waste never had a chance to sit long enough to decay. Everything organic was diluted, carried away, and replaced with fresh seawater. There were simply no stagnant pools, no hidden corners, no build-up at all. Decay, after all, requires time and stillness, and Viking ships allowed neither. When it came to human waste that had to be eliminated directly, it wasn't stored or managed in any complicated way. It was dispersed instantly. The ship sat quite low in the water, and the bow was only a short distance above the sea. Waste just went over the side at the front, where the wind and the ship's motion ensured rapid dilution. This practice actually survived into later naval traditions, which is why, even today, sailors still refer to bathrooms as the head. It was never really about convenience. It was about keeping waste from becoming a threat. Mobility was, the reset button that saved lives. Even the best system fails if pressure builds too long. Vikings understood this instinctively. Their ships required minimal water depth, which meant they could beach almost anywhere. Unlike later navies chained to ports, Vikings could stop frequently. Every few days they dragged their ships ashore, spread out, washed bodies and clothes, cooked fresh food, and let the ship dry out completely. This simple routine broke disease cycles before they even started. Archaeologists believe, actually, that Viking routes followed natural reset points along coastlines, places with fresh water, firm ground, and shelter. This constant movement prevented the biological collapse that destroyed crews forced to stay confined for months. When Vikings stayed healthy at sea, it wasn't because they endured filth. It was because they refused to remain still. Discipline and grooming, acted as biological armour. Popular culture tends to portray Vikings as filthy, but archaeology says the opposite. Combs are among the most common artefacts found in Viking graves, even more frequent than weapons. These weren't just vanity items. They removed lice and parasites that spread deadly diseases. Grooming was routine, expected, and, you might say, enforced socially. Written sources confirm, weekly bathing, frequent clothing changes, and communal washing among the Vikings. Saturday in Old Norse, interestingly enough, literally meant washing day. Travellers from other cultures sometimes mocked the shared wash basins. But, honestly, the outcome mattered far more than appearances. Parasites, they struggled to spread. In an age before germ theory, Viking culture managed to create hygiene through discipline rather than technology. Fermentation, you see, quietly solved the water problem. Fresh water just rots in barrels. Sailors, in fact, learned this the hard way for centuries. Vikings, however, avoided it almost entirely. They drank weak ale, fermented whey, and sour milk products. Brewing required boiling water, and fermentation lowered the pH. Both processes really killed dangerous bacteria. Vikings didn't know why it worked. They only knew it lasted. This accidental pasteurization meant Viking crews avoided one of the greatest killers in maritime history. While later navies died drinking contaminated water, Vikings stayed hydrated on liquids that resisted spoilage and delivered calories at the same time. It was survival by tradition rather than science. The real lesson of Viking sanitation. Vikings didn't win by adding systems. They won by eliminating conditions where systems fail. They allowed waste to disperse before it accumulated. They reset often. They moved constantly. They enforced discipline through culture rather than rules. Their goal wasn't comfort. It was operational survival. They weren't immune to disease. Archaeology still shows parasites and infections, but their crews stayed functional long enough to succeed. That's the standard that matters in survival history. If this breakdown helped you see ancient survival through a clearer lens, subscribe to WARFRONT Survival. Share this video with someone who values real historical intelligence, and leave a comment with the next survival system you want dissected. History doesn't keep secrets forever. You just have to know where to look.